Blessed are you who feel the wound of fresh loss, or of the loss, no matter how fresh, that still makes your voice crack all these years later. You who are stuck in the impossibility, frozen in disbelief. How can this be? It wasn't supposed to be this way. Blessed are you, fumbling around for answers or truths to make this go down easier, who demand answers or are dissatisfied with the shallow theology and trite platitudes. Blessed are we who instead demand a blessing, because we have wrestled with God and are here, wounded, broken, changed. Blessed are we who keep parenting, who keep our marriages and friendships and jobs afloat, who stock the pantry, because what choice do we have but to move forward with a life we didn't choose, with a loss we thought we couldn't live without. One small step, one small act of hope at a time.
When I was a younger man, there was a bookstore in Uptown that had the following words printed in massive lettering on the wall. Literature is the one place in any society where within the secrecy of our own heads, we can hear voices talking about everything in every possible way. I have always loved to read, but until I read those words, I couldn't tell you precisely why, but that's it. I love stories because they express whatever is there, no matter how scandalous, how scary, or how dark. Stories don't exist so you and I can come and either believe in them or judge them. They simply exist so you and I can enter into them and hopefully be moved by them. As a church, you have entered into a story that the church historically has liked to avoid, the story of Job. This story, in a nutshell, says that whatever you think is the absolute worst thing that can happen to you, it can happen to you. The things that you love most, the people that you love most, you can lose. And not just that. In the wake of unimaginable loss, you'll be asked to carry on. You'll be asked to continue to choose life in spite of loss. That's a tough story. Not because it's difficult for us to understand. It's a tough story because we understand just how true it is. Every one of us understands that we live just a moment away from loss, and so we would rather just not think about it. As a therapist, I could stand up here for a very long time and extol all the benefits of studying Job, but I will not do that to you this morning. What I will do is focus on one practice that can help us cope with our loss and hopefully move us into a deeper life with God. This practice is called the prayer of lament. There's actually an entire book in the Bible devoted to lament called Lamentations, but you would be forgiven for not knowing that because ain't nobody walking around quoting it. But maybe we should, because Lamentations, like the story of Job, tells the truth about the way things are. Prayers of lament say, look, I'm suffering, God doesn't care, and none of this is ever getting any better. Good morning. This morning, Tim Tebow, who helped to make famous the verse Philippians 4:13, was speaking over at Highland Park United Methodist Church. In that verse, under his eyes, said, I can do all things through the one who strengthens me. Let me tell you which verse he did not put under his eyes. This one from Lamentations. God has made my teeth grind on gravel and made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is, so I say, gone is my glory and all that I hoped from the Lord. That verse does not pump us up, but here's my question. You ever been there? Yeah, me too. Job was as well. Pastor Andy has already oriented you into the story, so here's the quick catch-up. Job is a righteous man who has found favor with God, and this guy has everything you could want in life. He has financial security, and he has rich, deep, and abiding relationships. And then in a single moment, all of it is taken from him. And where we find him in the story now is that he's coming to God and he is lamenting about his troubles. So let's dive into lament. What I hope to share with you this morning is 5 things that lament can do for us. So first is this. What does lament do? Well, first, lament acknowledges the reality of our situation. Lament is a space where we can come and we can say, this is true, this is real, and this is how I actually feel. Lament is permission, to come into your place of prayer and worship and not pretend that things aren't as bad as they are. The blessing of lament fundamentally is that you and we get to be honest. I believe in being honest when it comes to the worst things. I believe in naming exactly how bad it is. We don't move through suffering by pretending that the worst thing we're experiencing is not the worst thing we're experiencing. As a therapist, I sit with people as they navigate the worst things in their life. Specifically, I work with a lot of people who have lost a loved one to suicide. It's heavy work. It's not work that I chose. It chose me. God brought it to me and said, here, do this. I guess I'm just lucky like that. When I do this work, at the very beginning, I validate to the bereaved exactly how horrific their loss is, and I do it with some very carefully selected words. I look them in the eye and I say, you have suffered a profound loss. A person that you love has taken their own life. Could there be anything worse? Now, I don't enjoy saying these words, but I do it because it's necessary to orient us to the work that needs to be done. As an artist cannot paint until she has chosen her canvassing, a person cannot heal until she has acknowledged the reality of her situation. Some of you won't be surprised to know that when I say those words to the person who is suffering, there is most often a look of relief upon their face because they know in that moment, oh, we're going to tell the truth. Oh, in this place, I can be honest about just how bad it is. Prayers of lament say, it's this bad. Look at the verse you've got printed in your bulletin. This is just a piece of the lament from Job. Is it popping up for you? No. You've got it printed, right? There's some of it. My flesh is clothed with worms and dirt. My skin hardens, then breaks out again. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope. He goes on to talk about never being able to see the good. He says the people who go down to Sheol, they never come back again. He says, you know what, it's so bad, I'm going to stop talking. I'm just going to express the anguish that is in my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. What Job is saying is he is acknowledging the reality of his situation. He is giving you and I permission that when you come into the house of prayer, there is absolutely no requirement that you put a happy face on. You can be honest. Let me tell you 3 reasons for why I think you ought to do that. For why I think that lament is good news. Here's the first. It's deeply human. I often say to people that a full human life is a life that involves tears. Stephen Colbert has famously discussed the family members that he lost in a plane crash when he was a young man, and he talks about the reality of how grief comes to visit every one of us, and he's exactly right. Grief visits. To be a human being is to not simply be joyful and happy all of the time. It is to weep in your sorrow. To lament, to be honest with God, is to simply take your place amongst humanity. It is human. The second reason we ought to be honest is because we must process our loss or we can get stuck in our loss. And I could tell you a lot of benefits of processing your loss, but let me give you at least one. When we choose to not name the reality of the situation, when we say, okay, yes, I'm suffering in this way, but I'm just going to put it over here, here's what it does. It removes you further and further from other people. It isolates you. When we process our loss, when we share, we are expressing our humanity and we feel closer tied to humanity. It's human. It connects you to others. The third reason we ought to acknowledge the situation is that if we can name something, we can tame something. In my 30s, I did not name and acknowledge the reality of some of my own struggles with depression and anxiety, and because I did not name them, they came up and presented a crisis for me in my life. And that crisis had devastating consequences. I wrote about it in a book titled Depression, Anxiety, and Other Things We Don't Want to Talk About because, well, frankly, I didn't want to talk about it. But we need to talk about it. So the foundation of lament tells you we can tell the truth. We can say with confidence, this is real, this is true, and this is how I actually feel about it. The second thing that lament does is that it opens us up to our pain. Now, left to our own devices, most of us will choose to ignore our pain. You ever rehabbed a knee from surgery? Would you like to go to the physical therapist and do those exercises, or do you want to watch Netflix? Me too, right? Unless there's some kind of a forcing function, we tend to say, oh, pain, yeah, I want none of that. But here's the deal. Pain is communication. Pain lets you know, hey, there's an issue underneath the surface that needs to be addressed. And emotional pain is also communication. Think of it like this way. You put food in a refrigerator to store it, but at a certain point, right, that food needs to come out of the refrigerator and be consumed. Otherwise, it goes bad. Emotional pain operates in a similar way. Whenever you experience a difficult emotion, because you're a human being, you don't have the luxury of just saying, oh, I'm not going to deal with that. If you leave it inside and you do not find a healthy way to process it, it at some point is going to come out of you sideways. We call these sideways expressions disorders, neuroses, addiction, unhealthy relationships. We must process our pain, but we can't do it all of the time. It's like staring at the sun. What we need to do is find ways to express the pain in limited and time-focused activities. As Christians, we have a gift. Lament is one of those ways. You can come and you can return to your pain and be honest about your pain and talk to God and say, I hear this. This is communication. And as you express it, it's amazing how instructive it can be to show you how to treat the pain. So we acknowledge our reality. We open ourselves up to pain. And the third thing in lament is that lament will revise our assumptive world. And this is where the story of Job really starts to thump, because Job did all the things right. Job was righteous. He was the most righteous man in the land, and he still gets kicked in the teeth. And I wonder, how many of us assume that because we love God and we love our neighbor and we go to work and we pay our taxes and we're generally good, how many of us assume that the good life then is guaranteed? I know that I do this. Perhaps not consciously, but unconsciously, I kind of think, you know what? I deserve for my life to keep going in the way that it's been going. Or at the very least, I see the calamity of others and I think, yeah, but that's not really going to happen to me, is it? Job reminds me that that kind of thinking is delusional. Job says, no. That which you love, you can lose. Lives can get cut short. The future is not guaranteed. Aren't you glad that you chose to came to church this morning? Goodness. Now here's the deal. Prayers of lament can help us integrate our fear of calamity. Because here's how fear works. You don't just get to turn fear off. It's not like a switch, it's a process. So in my office, I have a rug, and on it there's a two-headed snake because I, like a lot of people, have an irrational fear of snakes. And so what the snakes on the rug remind me to do is that whenever fear pops up in the work that I'm doing, I know we got to move right toward it. Because there's only one tool that I have found that is effective against fear, and it's this: you got to throw your head at it. And you got to move toward the fear over and over again, because if you do, here's what happens. You go towards that which you were afraid of, then you survive it, and then you say to yourself, my God, I'm still alive. And on the other side of fear, then you have an opportunity to keep on living. Fear must be integrated and onboarded, and the only way to do that, my friends, is to move toward it. If you go back from fear, that which you fear gets more powerful. So we must integrate it. Lament helps us to do that. We don't have to be quiet. We can recognize that nothing is guaranteed and still have hope that all that we need is guaranteed from the power of God. The fourth thing that lament can help us do is it can help us reconstruct our relationship to what and who we have lost. Lament is particularly powerful when we suffer the deepest of loss, which is when we lose someone we love to death. Death is the most intense forced surrender that any of us will ever experience. One moment you have your beloved, and then the next moment you don't. Older theories of grief compelled people to move on in their lives. The thinking was that you wanted to take the energy that you had in the old relationship and you wanted to direct that into new relationships. These models of grief basically thought of love like we do with money, that there was a fixed sum. That if you needed to take this energy, right, from one investment and put it into another to move on, we no longer think that about grief. One of the reasons we don't think that anymore is because we know that the majority of people who lose someone in their life, particularly widows and widowers, they say that they experience the presence of their beloved in the wake of their death. They describe feeling as though they still can interact and still are guided by them and still love them, and they report that these overwhelming feelings do not keep them locked in the past. They say these feelings actually encourage me to dig down in my present and make the most of life. So in other words, modern grief theory confirms what we Christians have believed for a very long time, that death does not so much represent the end of life as it does the transformation of life. And so our relationships can carry on. And when we return to God in the prayers of lament and we say that, look, the pain of my past has not stayed in my past. The pain of my past is still with me in my present. We don't get stuck in the past. That gives us the opportunity to reconstruct the present. Lament. Lament. We move forward with lament. Not to spoil the ending, but one of the epiphanies that Job has as he laments to God is one that we would all be wise to heed. Near the end of the story, he recognizes, okay, hold on. The reality of the situation is that I did not create existence, nor did I choose to bring myself into existence. So even though I have lost so many people I have loved, I can still posture my heart in gratitude. And I have to tell you, one of the most powerful mindsets any person can take at any point in their life is one of deep and abiding gratitude. Loss is so difficult. And yet, if we can keep our heart open to be thankful that we are still here, then anything can be reconstructed. There's hope. The last thing I want to say about lament is that it can help you reinvent yourself. You know, at the end of the story, the Bible tells us that Job got back twice as much as he had before. And every time I read that, I think, well, that's hard to even process because we don't get back that which we've lost. And of course, we know Job didn't get back the children that he lost. He didn't get back the same material possessions that he lost. Here's what I think he got back. I think what he got back was an enlarged capacity for life, an enlarged capacity for flexibility, for gratitude, and for trust. We never get back what we lose, but we can always grow through what we lose. And we believe this because of that verse that Thibaut helped make famous. We actually do believe that we can do all things through the one who strengthens us because, as it turns out, literature is not the only place where we can hear voices talking about everything in every possible way. Because of lament, the church can be a place where we do that too. And so with that thought, let me leave you with one final meditation on the power of lament. Barbara Brown Taylor, in her wonderful book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, counts about 100 references to darkness in the Bible, and most of them are pretty bad. Sinners are cast out into darkness. Plagues cover the sun. And we're told that if our eye is bad, our entire body will be plunged into darkness. But there is another side of darkness that is worth pondering. God says to Abraham, walk out and look up into the night sky and count the number of stars if you wish to know how many descendants you're going to have. His grandson, Jacob, wrestles all night with an angel of God, and when the dawn rises, he's given a new name, Israel. His son, Joseph, is given the gift of interpreting dreams which come at night, and that gift ends up saving his life and keeping his people free. A little while later in the story, Moses leads the people of Israel from bondage out of Egypt across the Red Sea, and when does that happen? At night. which is also, by the way, when the manna falls from heaven that keeps them going as they wander through the desert toward the promised land. Fast forward now to Bethlehem, and you find a teenage girl giving birth to a baby boy in a barn in the dead of night. And then, 30 some odd years later, a teacher of the law named Nicodemus really wants to know the truth about God. And so he goes to Jesus at night and he says, "Tell me something true." And Jesus gives us those wonderful words that God is love. In fact, he loved the world so much, he gave his only begotten Son. And then shortly thereafter, when that only begotten Son is given, crucified, dead, and buried, the resurrection, that singular moment of glory, takes place in the utter darkness of a cave. My friends, God may be light, but his best work is always done in the dark. And so may you go forth from this place, knowing that when you are surrounded by darkness, you're in very good company. For the one who casts light into the dark is with you. And may you always remember the words of St. John, who forever proclaims, "There is a light that shines in the darkness, and that light has not, will not, nor ever be overcome." We are people of the in-between. We pray the prayers of lament, but they are not our final prayers. Will you pray with me? God our Father, as human beings, we want to turn away from that which is painful, and we want to stay safe, and we want to stay comfortable. And yet every one of us knows that to live in this life is to live a moment away from loss. And while that is scary, we give thanks that we don't have to face that alone. God, I pray that every one of us, in whatever darkness we face in our lives today or in the days to come, might be able to face that knowing that all that needs to be done has already been done. And that even though we walk in the darkness, and even though we don't know the way, we can trust that you walk with us, you provide the way, and you will show us the way. It is in the name of your precious Son that I pray. Amen.